Next, we'll see what web services are and how they can be used in a GeneXus application. Web services are programs that provide useful functionalities to other programs and are stored in web servers so that they can be located and invoked over a network, usually the Internet. When we publish the backend services of our application on the web server so that they can be accessed by other systems, they become web services. To facilitate access to these services, standards are used that define how to interact with them and the format of the information received. The service provider publishes a web service on a server, and the client applications consume the web service published. To access the service, the client application uses its location, URL, in order to invoke it, and sends it the required parameters. Then, it receives the returned information, usually as a structure in XML or JSON format. Web services can be developed by following different standards. The most common ones in the industry are SOAP and REST. Each standard defines how to publish the information about the functions available in the web service. SOAP web services use a definition written in WSDL, Web Services Description Language, while REST services use the Open API standard. To access a published web service, we must know its location and import its definition in order to access the functions available in the web service. GeneXus allows consuming web services that have been developed in any programming tool or platform with SOAP or REST protocols. To integrate a web service into a GeneXus application, go to Tools, Application Integration, select WSDL import if the web service follows the SOAP protocol, and Open API import if the web service has a REST architecture. This will trigger a wizard that will vary depending on the type of web service selected. Finally, if the web service is SOAP, GeneXus will automatically create an external object associated with the web service and the structured data types required for managing its data. Otherwise, if it was REST, several GeneXus objects will be automatically created, and will usually include them in a module, for example, web services. Also, they'll allow us to automatically run the service through these objects in our KB. The wizard will leave in an API folder the programs to invoke, and in a model folder the STTs to manage the data. Let's start by importing a list of countries from a SOAP web service into our application. To do so, we access the menu options Tools, Application Integration, WSDL Import, and type the URL displayed on screen, and click on Next. We see that a service called Country Info Service was found. To order the imported objects, we're going to save them in the SOAP web service folder, leave the suggested prefix, and click on Next. We click on the plus sign and on the Service Description node. Note that a list of the functions offered by the web service opens, such as List of country names by name to get the list of country names, Country currency to get a country's currency, Country flag to get an image of its flag, and so on. We click on Import so that GeneXus imports the web service definition, and we see that in the output window, we're informed that a series of structured data types and other components are being imported. At the end, we confirm that the SOAP web service folder appears in the KB Navigator, and in its contents, we find the external object Country Info Service, and a series of STTs that will allow us to store the information received from each method of the service. If we double-click on Country Info Service, we can see that all the methods offered by the Country Info Service web service have been incorporated to the external object, detailing the necessary parameters of each method and what type of data it returns. In particular, we are interested in the List of Country Names by Name method, which will return a list of countries ordered by name. Now we create a web panel called Web Panel Country List from Web Service. In its variables, we create a variable of country info service type that automatically takes the data type of the external object. If we return to the definition of the external object, we see that the data type returned by the list of country names by name method is an SDT called country info service country code and name. We open it and see that it stores the ISO code of the country and its name. Let's return to the web panel. Create a country list variable of the data type SDT country info service country code and name and set it as a collection. Now in the form, we drag a button with the event name, Get Countries List. We double-click on it, and in the event, we insert the variable country list and assign it the variable country info service. If we type a period, we see that we can access all the methods of the web service. So we choose List of Country Names by Name. We return to the form and drag the country list variable based on the SDT, and we press OK. We run it. If we open the web panel country list from web service, and press the button Get Countries List, we obtain the list of countries in alphabetical order with the ISO code of each one of them, just as we expected. This data can then be used in our travel agency application as a selection list to filter by a country or in different uses. Let's look at the case of importing a REST web service that complies with the OpenAPI specification, also known as the Swagger specification. The example is obtained from the webpage app.swaggerhub.com, an API called GetCountries. We choose the Download API option and download the YAML file. Next, we select Tools, Application Integration, OpenAPI Import, and choose the YAML file we had downloaded. As a folder, we type REST OpenAPI Web Service and click on Next. We see in the output window that several elements are imported, and when finished, we open the destination folder. We can see that the API folders were created containing the methods that we can invoke, the client folder with the API base URL method, and the model folder containing several SDTs that are the data types returned by the previous methods. If we open the SDT called getAll, we can see all the data that we can retrieve from the countries. And if we want to get the list of countries, we can invoke the getAllAPI method that will return the data in the variables getAllOut, collection of getAll elements, HTTP message, and the Boolean variable isSuccess. Next, we can run through the getAllOut collection to get the country data. OData services are a special type of web services. These services use the Open Data Protocol, OData, designed to provide operations that insert, modify, or delete records in a database through a website. Just as for a SOAP or a REST web service, its definition had to be imported first. In order to consume an OData service, we must first import the model with the database entities included in the service. To do so, we go to Tools, Application Integration, and select External Data Store Service Import. Since the process implies creating a data store of service type to associate it with the external data store, we can only use this feature in GeneXus Full. After executing the wizard, as many transaction objects will be created as entities were included in the model, and we'll be able to work with them as with any other transaction in our application. GeneXus also allows creating web services and publishing them on a web server. The GeneXus objects that can be exposed as web services are procedures, business components, and data providers. To expose one of these objects as a web service, we set the property expose as web service to true and indicate whether to use SOAP protocol, REST, or both. If we want the service to provide CRUD operations on a database, you can also generate the necessary information following the OData protocol. As an example, we'll create a REST web service that inserts a new airline in the database and will invoke it from our application. To do so, first we open the airline transaction and set its business component property to true. Then, we're going to create a procedure object that receives by parameter the data of an airline and inserts a new record in the airline table. We call the procedure createNewAirline WS and create a parm rule with two input variables, airline name and airline discount percentage. We create these two variables using the add variable. And then, in the variables section, we create another variable called airline of airline business component type. In the source, we write the code to insert an airline with the data received by parameter. We don't have to enter a value for airline ID because it's auto-numbered. Now, we open the properties of the procedure object and set expose as web service to true, SOAP protocol to false. We leave REST protocol set to true and set generate open API interface to yes. The latter will allow the definition of our web service to be generated in the Open API standard. We right-click on the procedure and select Build with this only, so that the service will be published on our web server, in this case on our local machine. In the output window, we see a message confirming that the documentation of the REST API of the web service was generated with its definition. Before importing the web service, we'll create a new module called Web Services, so everything is stored in that module. To import the web service, we go to Tools, Application Integration, and select OpenAPI Import. In the file path URL, we type C models travel agency C# model web default .yaml. Because it's where the REST API documentation was generated, and select the Web Services module as target. We confirm that everything has been imported correctly. If we open the Web Services module, the imported procedure is located in the API folder. Also, we see that in the model folder, there is an SDT called createNewAirline WS input, and if we open it, we can see that the parameters we need to pass to the service are available here. To test whether the web service works correctly, we created a web panel called createNewAirline using WS. Next, we drag a button to the form and call the event createAirline. We open the variables and create a variable createNewAirline WS input, which is automatically set as SDT type. In order to receive feedback about the result of the web service execution, we also created a variable isSuccess and another one, HTTP message. We double-click on the button and in the event, we load the members of the SDT. Next, we invoke the web service passing the SDT as a parameter. And finally, we write the following code to show messages on screen. We press F5. We see the lines that we've entered. And we execute the web panel that we've just created. We press the button and see that the service informs us that the airline was created correctly. To confirm it, we select the airline transaction and see that the airline we wanted has been actually added. We'll now see another way to publish objects as services using the API object. The API object, Application Programming Interface, is a GeneXus object that allows us to programmatically define and access interface to objects of our application, such as procedures or data providers. This means that an external application will be able to access these objects published as web services. The API object adds an intermediate layer that separates the interface from the implementation details, so that future programming changes to objects do not affect the way they're invoked by external applications. For example, a mapping is made between the internal name of the object in the KB and the name with which it's exposed as a service. Also, you can change the type and name of the parameters, or change the access path, without this affecting the way the service is invoked. This abstraction provides significant flexibility because we can evolve our services without forcing the applications that use them to change their code to accommodate these changes. To create an API object, go to the Data Management category and select the API type. In its properties, we can define at design time its name, address, and protocol to be used, among other things. The gPRC protocol is a modern open source framework developed by Google, which allows calls to remote procedures with high performance and in a bidirectional way. The API object has three sections: service source, events, and variables. The name of each service to be published is defined in service source through a declarative syntax with the corresponding parameters and the name of the GeneXus object in our KB that we're exposing as a service, with its corresponding parameters. In the example, we see that the data provider that we previously created under the name Ranking Countries with Attractions Quantity is being published as a service under the name Ranking Countries Attractions, and the parameters that we expose are the same as those of the object. The same is true for the Attractions by Name list that we publish under the name List Attractions by Name. In the future, this definition will allow us to change the name or parameters of the GeneXus object without changing the definition of how this object is published. In the events, we have the events before and after, with which we can perform actions that are executed before or after the invocation of the object as a service. In the variables, there are some of the standard type, which allow us to define or change characteristics of the API object at runtime. For more information about web services in GeneXus, click on these wiki links.